He'd had no choice, the sitter canceled. The cleaning job paid triple overtime, and the rent was due tomorrow. What he didn't expect was for the most powerful woman in the city to answer her office door personally at 6 a.m., designer heels clicking against marble, only to freeze when she saw Emma's face. The coffee cup slipped from Victoria's manicured fingers, shattering against the floor like the carefully constructed walls around her heart. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The elevator climbed 43 floors in silence, save for Emma's soft humming and the mechanical whir of cables overhead. Brandon adjusted his grip on the industrial cleaning cart, its wheels squeaking against the polished floor. 5:47 a.m. The Sterling Tower was a monument of glass and steel piercing the Seattle skyline, and he was about to clean the office of the woman who owned half of it. Emma pressed her nose against the elevator's glass wall, watching the city shrink below them. "Look, Daddy, the cars look like toys." "Don't touch the glass, baby. We're working." She pulled her hand back, leaving a small smudge shaped like a star. Brandon reached for his cleaning cloth, then stopped. Let someone else worry about it. Today was about survival. $300 for a deep clean of the executive floor. Enough to keep the lights on for another month. The elevator chimed. 43rd floor. The doors opened to reveal a reception area that cost more than Brandon made in a year. Italian leather chairs. Abstract art that probably had names he couldn't pronounce. A reception desk carved from a single piece of black walnut. "Wow," Emma whispered. Brandon felt the familiar twist in his stomach, the weight of showing his daughter a world that would never belong to them. But she needed to see him work, needed to understand that dignity came from doing what you had to do, no matter how small you felt doing it. He'd been cleaning offices for 2 years now, ever since the accident. Ever since Sarah died and left him with a 4-year-old daughter and medical bills that turned their savings account into a graveyard of zeros. Day shift at the warehouse, night shift with a mop and vacuum. Emma stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez most evenings, but the sitter had called in sick, and Brandon couldn't afford to miss this job. "Stay close," he told Emma, pushing the cart toward the corner office. "And quiet, okay? This is Daddy's work." The nameplate on the door read Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, in crisp serif font. Brandon had seen her picture in the business section, sharp-featured, silver hair pulled back severely, eyes that could cut through steel, the kind of woman who fired people with a signature and never looked back. He knocked softly. No answer. The night security guard had said she'd be in early, but maybe, "Come in." The voice was crisp, commanding. Brandon turned the handle and pushed the cart inside. Victoria Sterling stood behind her desk, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. She was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 5'5" without the heels, but she carried herself like she owned every inch of space around her. Which, Brandon supposed, she did. "You're early," she said without looking up from her laptop. "Yes, ma'am, I can wait if—" "No. Better to get it over with." She glanced up then, and her eyes moved from Brandon to Emma, who was standing partially hidden behind his legs. "I wasn't expecting. My sitter canceled. She won't be any trouble." Emma's good about staying out of the way. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She closed the laptop with a soft click. "How old?" "4. Victoria repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. "She should be in preschool. She starts in the fall." "When I can." Brandon felt heat creep up his neck. "She won't touch anything, I promise." Victoria moved around the desk, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Brandon's rent, but there was something fragile about the way she moved, like she was walking on ice. She stopped 3 feet from Emma, crouching down to her eye level. "What's your name?" Emma looked up at Brandon, then back at Victoria. "Emma Rose Patterson. That's a beautiful name. I'm Victoria. Are you a princess?" Victoria's lips almost curved into a smile. Almost. No, sweetheart. Just someone who works very hard. My daddy works hard too. He cleans things to make them pretty again. This time Victoria did smile, but it was the kind of smile that hurt to look at. I'm sure he does. She stood, and Brandon saw her hands tremble slightly as she smoothed her skirt. Professional mask back in place. I have calls to make, she said. Try to keep the noise down. Brandon nodded, pulling his supplies from the cart. Emma settled into a chair by the window with her coloring book, and he began the familiar ritual: dust first, then vacuum, then surfaces. 40 years of accumulated success needed careful attention. The office was a study in controlled perfection. Awards lined the walls: Businesswoman of the Year, Entrepreneur of the Decade, Philanthropist Award. But there were no photographs. No personal touches. Nothing that suggested Victoria Sterling was anything more than her title. Brandon worked methodically, years of practice making his movements efficient and quiet. But he found himself glancing at Victoria as she took calls. The way she held her shoulders rigid, the careful modulation of her voice, power as armor. The quarterly projections are unacceptable, she was saying into her phone. I don't care what the board thinks. We restructure or we fail. Those are the options. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Daddy, is she sad? The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's call paused mid-sentence. Why would you think that, baby? Brandon whispered. She talks angry, but her eyes look like when you miss mommy. Brandon felt the world tilt slightly. Emma had Sarah's eyes wide and brown and impossibly knowing. Sometimes she saw things that made him believe in something beyond the mathematics of grief. Victoria ended her call abruptly. The office fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 43 floors below. I need coffee, Victoria announced to no one in particular. She walked to a small kit-pier seat in the corner of the office, filling a silver coffee maker with practiced efficiency. Emma slipped from her chair and padded over to where Brandon was cleaning the windows. Daddy? What, baby? Can I give her something? Brandon paused, spray bottle in hand. What do you mean? Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a small piece of construction paper folded in half. I made it yesterday. For someone sad. Before Brandon could stop her, Emma walked over to Victoria's desk and placed the paper next to her laptop. Victoria, still facing the coffee maker, didn't notice. Emma, come back here. But it was too late. Victoria turned, coffee cup in hand, and saw the bright yellow paper on her pristine desk. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions: annoyance, confusion, something else Brandon couldn't name. She set down her coffee and picked up the paper, unfolding it carefully. It was a drawing in crayon stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. For someone who needs a hug was written in Emma's careful 4-year-old handwriting. Victoria stared at the paper for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Emma, she said, her voice softer than Brandon had heard it. This is beautiful. Do you need a hug? Emma asked with the directness that only children possess. The question seemed to hit Victoria like a physical force. Her composure cracked, just for a second, and Brandon saw something raw and human beneath the polished surface. Victoria's voice caught. She cleared her throat, professional mask sliding back into place. That's very kind of you. But Emma wasn't deterred by adult politeness. She walked around the desk and wrapped her small arms around Victoria's legs in an impromptu hug. Victoria froze. For a moment Brandon thought she might push Emma away. Instead, very slowly, she reached down and touched Emma's hair with trembling fingers. The coffee cup slipped from Victoria's other hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sound broke the spell. Victoria jerked back. Emma stepped away, and Brandon rushed over with paper towels. I'm sorry, he said, kneeling to clean up the mess. Emma, I told you not to. No. Victoria's voice was sharp, then softer. No, accidents happen. She was staring at Emma with an expression Brandon couldn't read. Longing? Fear? Recognition? "How long have you been alone?" Victoria asked, suddenly. Brandon looked up from the coffee-stained floor. "Ma'am?" "You and Emma. How long since her mother?" 2 years. The words felt like stones in his mouth. Victoria nodded as if this confirmed something. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the glass, looking out at the city she'd conquered but that had never given her what she really wanted. "I had a daughter once," she said quietly. She would have been about Emma's age. The words hung in the air like a confession. Brandon stopped cleaning, paper towels forgotten in his hands. "Would have been?" he asked gently. "She was stillborn, 7 years ago. Amelia Rose. Rose. Like Emma Rose." Brandon felt something click into place. Victoria's reaction to Emma's name, her careful distance, the tremor in her hands. "I'm sorry," Brandon said, and meant it. Victoria turned from the window. Her eyes found Emma, who was quietly coloring again, humming a song Sarah used to sing. After that, work became easier. You can't lose what you never let yourself have. She said it like she was reciting a business strategy, but Brandon heard the fracture underneath. He'd worn that same armor after Sarah died, the belief that distance equaled protection. "But you still lost," Emma said without looking up from her coloring book. The words hit the room like a bell. Victoria's breath caught audibly. "What did you say?" Emma looked up with those impossible eyes. "You lost your little girl. That's why you're sad. Daddy was sad too when Mommy went to heaven." Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of things that couldn't be fixed with money or power or careful control. Victoria walked slowly to where Emma was sitting. She knelt down, her expensive suit forgotten, and studied Emma's drawing with the intensity she usually reserved for quarterly reports. "What are you coloring?" "A family," Emma said simply. "See, there's the daddy and the little girl and the angel mommy watching from the clouds. And there's room for more people if they want to be part of it." She pointed to empty spaces in the drawing spaces that looked intentional, like invitations. Victoria's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. She pressed her hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Brandon stood, uncertain. This was beyond his job description, beyond his understanding of how to navigate the grief of powerful strangers. But Emma simply reached over and patted Victoria's hand with sticky fingers. "It's okay to cry," Emma said. "Daddy cries sometimes too. But then we have breakfast and it's a little better." Victoria laughed through her tears, a sound like breaking glass that somehow held hope. "Breakfast? Pancakes are best. But cereal works too." For the first time since entering the office, Victoria looked directly at Brandon. Her makeup was smudged, her hair slightly mussed, her control completely gone. She looked human. She looked beautiful. "I don't remember the last time I had breakfast with someone," she admitted. Brandon made a decision that would change everything. "We usually go to Mel's diner after I finish work," he said. "Nothing fancy. But Emma likes the pancakes, and they don't mind if she colors on the placemats." Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of mascara. "I couldn't. I have meetings." "It's Saturday," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Saturdays are for pancakes and people." Victoria looked at the small girl who had somehow seen through 43 floors of steel and glass to find the lonely woman hiding inside. "Saturdays are for pancakes. And people," she repeated slowly, as if learning a new language. Brandon finished cleaning up the broken coffee cup, giving Victoria time to collect herself. When he looked up, she was studying Emma's crayon drawing again, tracing the stick figures with her finger. "I don't know how," Victoria said quietly. "How to what?" Brandon asked. "Any of it. Breakfast. Conversation that isn't about profit margins. Being around children without falling apart." Emma looked up from her coloring. "It's easy. You just have to be nice and not worry about being perfect." Out of the mouths of babes. Victoria straightened her suit, smoothed her hair, and walked to her desk. For a moment, Brandon thought she was retreating back into her executive shell. Instead, she picked up her phone and began canceling her morning appointments. "Reschedule the board meeting," she told her assistant. "Personal emergency. Yes, I understand the inconvenience. Reschedule it anyway." She hung up and looked at Brandon and Emma, this father and daughter who had wandered into her sterile world and cracked it open like an egg. "I suppose," she said carefully, "I could try pancakes." Emma clapped her hands together. "And you can tell us about your building. It's really tall." Victoria almost smiled. "It is rather tall, isn't it?" Brandon began packing up his supplies, mind racing. He'd come here to clean an office and earn $300. Instead, he'd witnessed something that felt like resurrection, a woman remembering how to be human, a little girl working magic with crayons and kindness. As they prepared to leave, Victoria stopped at her desk and picked up Emma's drawing. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her purse. "For later," she explained when she saw Brandon watching. "When I forget how to believe in families with extra spaces." The elevator ride down was different from the ride up. Emma chattered about pancakes and whether Victoria liked syrup or honey. Victoria listened with the careful attention of someone learning a foreign language. Brandon watched the two of them and felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years: hope. At Mel's diner, Victoria looked absurdly out of place in her designer suit among the vinyl booths and laminated menus. But Emma insisted she sit next to her, and by the time their pancakes arrived, Victoria was laughing at Emma's story about a squirrel who stole her sandwich. "He was very polite about it," Emma explained seriously. "He said, 'Excuse me,' with his tail." Brandon watched Victoria's face soften, her shoulders relax. She was still elegant, still powerful, but now she was also real. "I haven't laughed in a very long time," Victoria admitted as Emma drew on her placemat with the restaurant's broken crayons. "Laughing is important," Emma said without looking up. "It makes room for more good things." Victoria met Brandon's eyes across the table. In them he saw questions about loss, about healing, about the possibility of letting people in when you'd spent years keeping them out. He didn't have answers, but he had Emma, who saw the world as a place where stick figures could hold hands under smiling suns, where there was always room for one more person in the family drawing. Outside the diner window, Seattle went about its Saturday morning business. But inside, at a corner booth with sticky syrup and broken crayons, 3 people, who had been strangers 2 hours ago, were learning how to build something new from the beautiful wreckage of their separate griefs. 3 weeks later, Brandon stood in the employee break room of Sterling Industries, staring at an envelope with his name written in Victoria's precise handwriting. Inside was a job offer, head of facilities management, salary that made his night cleaning wages look like pocket change, full benefits, daycare vouchers for Emma. He'd applied on impulse after their second breakfast at Mel's, when Victoria mentioned they were restructuring the facilities department. He never thought she'd actually consider him. Now the offer sat in his hands like a loaded gun, the answer to every prayer he'd whispered into his pillow for the past 2 years, and somehow terrifying because of it. "Daddy, why do you look scared?" Emma asked from where she sat, coloring at the small break-room table. Mrs. Rodriguez had canceled again, but this time Brandon didn't panic. Victoria had quietly arranged for Emma to spend mornings in the building's childcare center when needed. "Not scared, baby. Just thinking." The break-room door opened, and Victoria entered, moving with her usual purposeful stride but pausing when she saw them. Over the past 3 weeks, these chance encounters had become less chance and more routine. Victoria would find reasons to check the facilities department. Brandon would time his breaks to coincide with her coffee runs. Emma would appear with new drawings that somehow always ended up taped to Victoria's office window. "Brandon." Victoria's voice was carefully neutral, but Brandon had learned to read the micro-expressions beneath her professional mask. the slight softening around her eyes, the way her shoulders dropped half an inch when she saw Emma. "I trust you received the offer." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Emma looked up from her coloring. "Victoria, look, I drew your building again, but this time I made it into a rocket ship." Victoria moved closer to examine Emma's artwork. Sterling Tower transformed into a vessel bound for the stars, complete with flames shooting from the bottom and stick figures waving from the windows. "Where is it going?" Victoria asked. "To find happy things," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes you have to travel really far to find them." Victoria's fingers traced the edge of the paper. "And sometimes they find you." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning Brandon was afraid to examine too closely. These breakfasts had become something more than charity or coincidence. Victoria would call with questions about Emma's favorite foods, remember details about her drawings, ask about her preschool plans with the intensity she usually reserved for hostile takeovers. And Brandon? He found himself looking forward to Victoria's texts, the way she listened when he talked about Sarah, how she never tried to fix his grief, but simply sat with it. She was learning to be human again, and somehow teaching him the same lesson. "I should get back," Victoria said, but she didn't move. "The board meeting is in 20 minutes. "The Peterson acquisition?" Brandon asked. He'd been reading the business section lately, trying to understand the world Victoria navigated daily. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've been following the merger talks. Emma likes to hear about your work. She thinks you're a dragon who protects treasure. But the good kind." "The good kind?" Emma looked up seriously. "The kind that shares." Victoria laughed. The sound was becoming more natural, less like breaking glass. "I'm not sure the Peterson board would agree with that assessment. Are you going to say yes to the job?" Emma asked Brandon with her usual directness. Victoria went very still. Brandon realized she'd been holding her breath. "I don't know, baby. It's complicated." "How?" "Out of the mouths of babes, how indeed?" The job was perfect, the salary life-changing, the benefits everything he needed. But accepting meant acknowledging that Victoria Sterling had become more than Emma's Saturday morning breakfast companion, more than the lonely CEO who kept his daughter's drawings taped to her window. "Sometimes," Brandon said carefully, "when something seems too good to be true, it makes you wonder what the catch is." Victoria's face went carefully blank. "I see." "No," Brandon said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I don't want Emma to get attached to something that might not last. She's already lost enough." The silence stretched like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Emma, oblivious to the adult tension, gathered her crayons and walked over to Victoria. "Can you help me reach the good markers? The ones up high?" Victoria lifted Emma effortlessly, and Brandon watched something shift in her posture, the careful control giving way to something softer. Emma grabbed the markers from the high shelf. Then, instead of asking to be put down, she wrapped her arms around Victoria's neck. "You smell like flowers," Emma said. "It's perfume. Very expensive perfume. I like it. It's pretty like you." Victoria's eyes met Brandon's over Emma's head, and he saw vulnerability there that made his chest tight. This woman who commanded boardrooms and bent million-dollar deals to her will was undone by a 4-year-old's casual affection. "Emma," Victoria said softly, "if I asked you something important, would you give me an honest answer?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Do you think your daddy would be happy working here? Really happy?" Emma considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "He'd be happy if you were happy too." The answer hit like a small earthquake. Victoria set Emma down gently, her hands trembling slightly. "And would you be happy?" Victoria asked. "Seeing me every day? Having me around more?" Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Would you have breakfast with us every day?" If your father wanted that, yes." "And would you come to my school play?" "I'm going to be a sunflower." Victoria's voice was thick when she answered, "I wouldn't miss it." Brandon watched this exchange with growing understanding. Victoria wasn't just offering him a job, she was offering herself, a place in their small, damaged family. The question was whether he was brave enough to accept. "The board meeting," he said quietly. Victoria checked her watch and swore softly. "I have to go. But Brandon, the offer stands. Not just the job. All of it." She kissed the top of Emma's head, a gesture so natural it might have been happening for years, and left the break room with her usual brisk efficiency. But Brandon noticed she took Emma's rocket ship drawing with her. That afternoon, Brandon picked Emma up from the childcare center and found her unusually quiet during the drive home. "Penny for your thoughts, baby." "Daddy, do you think Victoria is lonely?" The question shouldn't have surprised him. Emma had an uncanny ability to see through adult pretense to the truth underneath. "Why do you ask?" "She looks at us like she's hungry, but not for food." Brandon pulled into their apartment complex parking lot, the same complex where the heat got turned off when they were late on bills, where Miss Rodriguez watched Emma for free because she understood what it meant to struggle. Looking up at their second-floor window, he tried to imagine Victoria in their tiny living room, eating takeout pizza on paper plates while Emma commandeered the television. The image should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt like hope. "Maybe she is lonely," Brandon said finally. "Then we should help her not be." "It's not that simple, Em. Victoria lives in a different world than we do." Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to face him with those impossible brown eyes. "But she doesn't want to anymore. That's why she keeps coming to breakfast with us. That's why she learns about sunflowers and rocket ships, and why she keeps my pictures." Sometimes 4-year-olds saw more clearly than adults who'd spent years learning to be blind. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Brandon sat at his Kit Pierce table with the job offer spread in front of him. The salary figure stared back at him, more money than he'd made in the best year of his previous life. Enough to move to a better apartment, to put Emma in the preschool he'd been dreaming about, to stop lying awake at night doing math with bills and paychecks. But beneath the financial security was something more complicated, the question of what Victoria Sterling wanted from them and what he was prepared to give. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. "How did the board meeting go?" He stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I should probably ask you that." His phone rang immediately. "The Peterson acquisition is dead," Victoria said without preamble. "They wanted too many concessions, too much control." I walked away. Brandon could hear something in her voice, exhaustion, maybe relief. "How do you feel about that?" "A year ago I would have fought harder, found a way to make it work regardless of the cost." A pause. "But a very wise 4-year-old recently told me that sometimes you have to travel very far to find happy things." I realized I was traveling in the wrong direction. "Victoria, I know what you're thinking. That this is too much, too fast. That I'm trying to buy my way into your life with job offers and fancy salaries." Brandon leaned back in his chair. "Are you?" "Maybe. Partly." Her honesty was startling. "But also because watching you with Emma has reminded me what I actually want, and it's not another acquisition or a bigger market share." "What is it?" The silence stretched long enough that Brandon wondered if the call had dropped. "A family," Victoria said finally. "The kind where people eat breakfast together and laugh at stories about polite squirrels and tape crayon drawings to office windows. The kind where someone notices if you're sad and offers to sit with you until you're not." Brandon felt something shift in his chest, the careful walls he'd built around his heart developing hairline. Cracks. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said. "Emma and we come with baggage. Grief and late-night tears and nights when the bills don't add up right. It's not the life you're used to." "The life I'm used to is empty," Victoria said. "Beautiful and successful and completely hollow. I'd rather have complicated and real." Brandon looked around his small apartment, the couch with the broken spring, the Kit Pierce table where he and Emma ate cereal for dinner more often than he'd admit, the walls covered with her artwork and school papers. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "The job offer," he said. "Is it real? Not charity? Not guilt? Would you have hired me if you'd never met Emma?" "Your references are impeccable," Victoria said. "You've been managing facilities for 2 years, just on a smaller scale. You're reliable, thorough, and you understand that taking care of spaces is about taking care of the people who use them. So yes, the offer is real. And the rest of it?" Another long pause. "I want to try, Brandon. I want to see if 3 broken people can figure out how to be whole together. But only if you want that too." Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes and dragging her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy? Who are you talking to?" Brandon held out his arm, and she climbed onto his lap, curling against his chest with the boneless trust of childhood. "Victoria," he said into the phone. "Hi, Emma." Victoria's voice was soft, even through the speaker. "Are you coming to breakfast tomorrow?" Emma asked, yawning. "If you'll have me." "Always," Emma said simply, and Brandon felt the last of his resistance crumble. After he hung up, Brandon carried Emma back to bed, tucking her under the covers and smoothing her hair. "Daddy?" "What, baby?" "I think Victoria needs us." "Yeah," Brandon said, kissing her forehead. "I think we need her too." The next morning, Brandon walked into Mel's diner with the signed job offer in his jacket pocket and his daughter's hand in his. Victoria was already there, sitting in their usual booth, looking slightly less polished than normal. Her hair was in a ponytail instead of her usual severe bun, and she was wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. "You said yes," she said when she saw his face. "We said yes," Brandon corrected, lifting Emma into the booth beside Victoria. Emma immediately launched into a detailed explanation of her dream about flying elephants, and Victoria listened with the same attention she'd once reserved for quarterly projections. Brandon watched them together, this powerful woman and his small daughter, and marveled at how natural it looked. "I have something for you," Victoria said when Emma paused for breath. She pulled a small wrapped box from her purse. "An early congratulations gift." Emma tore off the wrapping paper to reveal a set of professional art supplies, real colored pencils, fancy markers, a sketch pad with heavy paper. "These are for grown-up artists," Victoria explained, "for someone who's going to create beautiful things." Emma hugged the art set to her chest, then launched herself at Victoria with the force of pure joy. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Victoria caught her, holding tight, and Brandon saw tears in her eyes. "There's something else," Victoria said to Brandon. "The facilities management position comes with a housing allowance. There's a townhouse in Queen Anne, 3 bedrooms, a yard, good schools nearby. If you're interested." Brandon stared at her. "Victoria, that's too much." "It's practical," she said firmly. "I need my facilities manager to be close to the building, available for emergencies, and Emma needs space to grow." "And you?" Brandon asked quietly. "What do you need?" Victoria looked at Emma, who was already sketching with her new colored pencils, then back at Brandon. "I need to learn how to be part of something bigger than myself," she said. "I need someone to teach me about polite squirrels and flying elephants and why Saturdays are for pancakes and people. That's a tall order. Good thing I'm a quick study." Their pancakes arrived, and Emma insisted on drawing the restaurant while they ate. Victoria asked questions about the artwork with the same intensity she'd once brought to due diligence reports. Brandon found himself talking about Emma's school plans, about Sarah, about the small rituals that held their life together. "Tell me about her," Victoria said suddenly. "Sarah." Brandon paused, fork halfway to his mouth. In 2 years no one had asked him that question. Everyone wanted to know how he was doing, how Emma was coping, but no one had asked him to remember the woman who'd been his world. She was. Brandon smiled, memory warming his voice. She was sunshine. Literally. She'd wake up singing, make breakfast while dancing, turn grocery shopping into an adventure. Emma gets that from her the way she sees magic in ordinary things. She sounds wonderful. She was. She would have loved watching you color with Emma. She always said the best people were the ones who weren't afraid to sit on the floor and see the world from a kid's perspective. Victoria glanced down at her expensive jeans, probably thinking about boardroom floors and dignified positions. "I'm terrified," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of messing this up. Of being too damaged, too set in my ways. Of disappointing Emma when she realizes I don't actually know how to be a mother." Brandon reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "None of us know what we're doing," he said. "I've been figuring it out as I go for 2 years. Love isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up and trying and not giving up when you get it wrong." Victoria turned her hand over, palm up, and laced their fingers together. The gesture was simple, natural, and it changed everything. "So, we figure it out together?" she asked. "Together," Brandon confirmed. Emma looked up from her drawing and saw their joined hands. Her face broke into the kind of smile that could power small cities. "Look," she said, holding up her sketch. "I drew us as a family." The picture showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun, standing in front of a very tall building that looked suspiciously like Sterling Tower. But this version had flowers growing around the base and birds perched on the windows. "It's perfect," Victoria said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Can we put it on your office window with the others?" Emma asked. "I think it should go somewhere more special," Victoria said. "Somewhere permanent." She looked at Brandon, question in her eyes. He understood what she was really asking, not about where to hang a drawing, but about whether they were really going to do this. Really going to become a family built from grief and hope and the miraculous alchemy of second chances. "The refrigerator," he said, "in our new house, right where everyone can see it." Victoria's smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, Brandon stood in the Kit Pierce of their Queen Anne townhouse, watching Victoria attempt to flip pancakes while Emma provided running commentary from her perch on the counter. "That one looks like a map of Africa," Emma announced as Victoria's latest pancake landed in a decidedly non-circular heap. "Geography lesson over breakfast," Victoria said, with mock seriousness. "Very educational. The next one should be Antarctica," Emma suggested. "It's mostly white anyway." Brandon smiled, sipping his coffee and marveling at how normal this felt. Victoria, in her weekend clothes, hair escaping from a messy bun, flour smudged on her cheek. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy, but it had been real. The first month had been the hardest. Victoria approached family life like a business acquisition, researching child development with the same intensity she'd once reserved for market analysis. She'd arrived at their apartment with educational toys, organic snacks, and a detailed schedule for Emma's optimal learning development. Emma had taken one look at the carefully curated activities and asked if they could just build a fort instead. That was Victoria's first lesson in the beautiful chaos of loving a child, that the best moments couldn't be scheduled or optimized. They happened in the spaces between plans, in the surrender to small hands and wild imagination. "Daddy, tell Victoria about the time Mommy made pancakes that looked like dinosaurs," Emma said, stirring chocolate chips into the batter with serious concentration. Brandon felt the familiar twinge that came with Sarah's memory, but it was softer now, less like a wound and more like a bittersweet gift. "Your mom was terrible at regular pancakes," Brandon said, moving to stand beside Victoria at the stove. "But somehow she could make perfect brontosauruses." "I would have liked to meet her," Victoria said quietly, focusing on the pan with perhaps more attention than pancakes required. "She would have loved you," Brandon said, and meant it. Sarah had possessed an uncanny ability to see through people's defenses to the tender places beneath. She would have recognized Victoria's loneliness immediately and set about healing it with the same gentle persistence Emma had inherited. Victoria's smile was soft, but tinged with sadness. They'd talked about Sarah often over the past months, not in the way that excluded Victoria, but in the way that helped her understand the foundation Emma and Brandon had built their love upon. Victoria had never tried to replace Sarah's memory. Instead, she'd learned to honor it while creating space for something new. "Can we visit her today?" Emma asked. "I want to show her my new drawings." Every Sunday, they went to the cemetery where Sarah was buried. At first, Victoria had offered to stay behind, giving them privacy for their ritual. But Emma had taken her hand and insisted she come along, explaining that Sarah needed to meet the new person in their family. Now it was Victoria who remembered to bring fresh flowers, who helped Emma arrange her artwork against the headstone, who sat quietly while Brandon told Sarah about their week. "Of course we can visit," Victoria said. "I brought tulips yesterday, her favorites." The easy way Victoria had woven herself into their traditions still amazed Brandon. She'd learned Emma's bedtime routine, memorized the songs Sarah used to sing, discovered that Emma needed exactly 3 stories and a glass of water before she'd consent to sleep. But more than that, Victoria had found ways to add her own touches: Saturday morning art projects, elaborate tea parties with Emma's stuffed animals, quiet conversations about feelings that Emma absorbed like a small, intuitive sponge. After breakfast, they drove to the cemetery in Victoria's car, a practical SUV she'd bought to replace her sleek sedan, claiming it was better for family adventures. Emma chattered in the back seat about her upcoming school play, where she'd been promoted from sunflower to narrator, a role she was approaching with theatrical gravitas. "I have to speak very clearly so everyone understands the story," Emma explained. "Miss Peterson says I have good diction." "Excellent diction," Victoria agreed. "You'll be the best narrator they've ever had." At the cemetery, Emma ran ahead to Sarah's grave, already launching into her weekly report. Brandon and Victoria followed more slowly, hands linked, falling into the comfortable silence they'd developed over months of shared grief and growing love. "Sarah, guess what?" Emma was saying to the headstone. "Victoria learned how to make grilled cheese without burning it, and Daddy got promoted again, and we're going to plant a garden with real vegetables." Victoria knelt beside Emma, arranging the tulips in the built-in vase. "Should I tell her about the surprise?" she asked conspiratorially. Emma's eyes lit up. "Yes, Sarah, Victoria is going to adopt me so we can be a real family with papers and everything." The words hit Brandon like a physical force. He and Victoria had talked about marriage, about making their relationship official, but adoption had been a bridge too far in his mind, too permanent, too much like erasing Sarah's place in Emma's life. Victoria must have seen his expression because she stood quickly, touching his arm. "We don't have to decide anything today," she said quietly. "It was just Emma's idea, and I thought, I want Victoria to be my other mommy," Emma said with the clarity that only children possessed. "Not instead of Mommy Sarah, but as well as. People can have more than one mommy if they're lucky." Brandon stared at his daughter this wise, resilient little person who'd somehow figured out that love multiplied rather than divided, that hearts expanded to hold more rather than less. "What do you think Mommy Sarah would want?" he asked Emma. Emma considered this with her usual seriousness, then smiled with absolute certainty. "She'd want us to be happy. And we're happiest when Victoria is with us." The truth of it was undeniable. Over the past 6 months, their small family had become something whole and beautiful. Victoria had learned to braid Emma's hair, to kiss scraped knees, to read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. And Emma had taught Victoria how to laugh without restraint, how to see wonder in ordinary moments, how to love without conditions or expectations. Brandon looked at Victoria, seeing the careful hope in her eyes, the way she was holding her breath waiting for his answer. "What would that look like?" he asked. "Officially, I mean." Victoria's voice was steady, but he could hear the emotion underneath. "Emma would legally be my daughter too. In case anything ever happened to you, she'd be protected, And when we get married. She paused, suddenly uncertain. I mean, if we get married. When we get married, Brandon corrected firmly. Because that's definitely happening. Victoria's smile could have powered the entire city. When we get married, we'd be a legal family in every sense. Emma clapped her hands together. Can I be in the wedding? I want to wear a princess dress and throw flowers. You can be whatever you want to be, Victoria said, kneeling to Emma's eye level. This is your family too. You get to help decide how it works. Brandon watched them together, his daughter, and the woman who'd somehow become essential to their breathing, and felt the last of his fear dissolve. Sarah had taught him that love wasn't finite, that caring for one person didn't diminish your capacity to care for others. Victoria was proving the same lesson in reverse. There's something else, Victoria said, suddenly shy. I've been thinking about names. Names? If I adopt Emma, she could hyphenate. Patterson Sterling. Or we could all change to something new when we get married. I know it's not traditional, but Sterling Patterson. Emma announced, That sounds like a law firm for princesses. Victoria laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet cemetery like music. Sterling Patterson it is. They spent another hour at Sarah's grave, Emma providing a detailed account of her week while Brandon and Victoria tended to the small garden they'd planted around the headstone. Daffodils were starting to push through the soil, Sarah's favorites, bright and hopeful and impossible to ignore. As they prepared to leave, Emma placed her latest drawing against the headstone, a family portrait that now included 4 figures, Mommy Sarah watching from a cloud, and Daddy, Victoria, and Emma holding hands below. Thank you for sharing them with me, Victoria whispered to the headstone, so quietly Brandon almost didn't hear. But Emma heard. She slipped her small hand into Victoria's larger one and smiled up at her with Sarah's eyes and Sarah's infinite capacity for love. She's not sharing, Emma said matter-of-factly. She's giving, because that's what mommies do. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the emotional weight of the morning. Victoria reached over and took Brandon's hand, their fingers interlacing with the easy familiarity of long practice. Are you sure? She asked quietly. About all of it? Marriage, adoption, the whole complicated, beautiful mess of becoming a family? Brandon glanced in the rearview mirror at Emma's sleeping form, then at Victoria's profile against the passenger window. 6 months ago she'd been a stranger in an expensive suit. Now she was home in a way he'd never expected to find again. I've never been more sure of anything, he said. Even knowing I'll probably mess up spectacularly. I've never been anyone's mother before. Emma's never had 2 mothers before either. You'll figure it out together. Victoria squeezed his hand. I love you, she said simply. Both of you. More than I knew was possible. We love you too, Brandon replied. All of us. That evening, after Emma was tucked into bed with her new art supplies and 3 stories, Brandon and Victoria sat on the couch in their living room, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of family life. Emma's drawings covered the walls, her toys occupied strategic positions throughout the house, and Victoria's business magazines shared coffee table space with coloring books and picture books about dinosaurs. When should we tell people at work? Victoria asked, curled against Brandon's side. About the engagement, the adoption? Are you worried about what they'll say? Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. 6 months ago I would have been. The board, the investors, the business press, they all have opinions about work-life balance and professional image. And now? Now I realize I don't care what they think. I spent 40 years building a company and forgot to build a life. Emma taught me the difference. Brandon kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with the lingering sweetness of Emma's bedtime routine. She has that effect on people, he said, making them remember what actually matters. I never thought I'd get this, Victoria said quietly. A family. Someone who loves me not because of what I can do for them or provide for them, but just because just because you're you. Pancake flipping, coloring book approving, cemetery visiting you? Victoria laughed softly. I like this version of me better. I like all the versions of you, Brandon said. The CEO who can stare down hostile boards, the woman who cries at Emma's drawings, the person who brings tulips to visit someone she never met because she knows it matters to us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the Seattle skyline through their living room window. Sterling Tower was visible in the distance, but it looked different now, less like a monument to isolation and more like just another building in a city full of people trying to figure out how to love each other. Brandon? Thank you. For what? For letting me in, for trusting me with Emma, for seeing past the suits and the boardroom persona to whatever was worth saving underneath. Brandon turned to face her, cupping her cheek in his hand. You didn't need saving, Victoria. You just needed someone to remind you that you were already whole. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promises about tomorrows they'd build together. When they broke apart, Emma was standing in the doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. I had a dream about the wedding, she announced, climbing onto the couch between them. There were flowers everywhere, and I got to throw petals, and Mommy Sarah was there too, watching from the sky. Victoria wrapped her arms around Emma, settling her against her chest with practiced ease. That sounds like a beautiful dream. It wasn't a dream, Emma said with 4-year-old certainty. It was a preview. Sometimes dreams show you what's going to happen when you love people enough. Brandon met Victoria's eyes over Emma's head, seeing his own wonder reflected there. How had they gotten so lucky? How had 3 broken people found each other in a city of millions and discovered they fit together like pieces of the same puzzle? Can we have the wedding here? Emma asked, yawning. In the backyard? With all my flowers from the garden? Absolutely, Victoria said. This is our home now. It should be where we make it official. Emma smiled, already drifting back to sleep in Victoria's arms. Good. Because families should celebrate in their own place, where all the love lives. Later, after they'd carried Emma back to bed, Brandon and Victoria stood in the doorway of what had once been his spare room and was now Emma's kingdom, walls covered with her artwork, shelves lined with books and toys, a small desk where she practiced writing her new hyphenated name in careful 4-year-old script. She's going to be amazing, Victoria whispered. She already is. Both her mothers made sure of that. Victoria leaned against him, solid and warm and perfectly right. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all have been some elaborate dream. If it is, Brandon said, then we're all dreaming the same dream, and that's magic enough for me. 6 months ago, Brandon had climbed 43 floors to clean an office. Instead, he'd found a family he never knew he was looking for. Emma had found another mother to love her. And Victoria had found her way back to the person she'd been before success and loss had taught her to build walls instead of bridges. Now they stood together in the home they'd built from the beautiful wreckage of their separate stories, watching over the small girl who'd somehow seen past all their defenses to the love they were meant to share. Tomorrow there would be wedding plans and adoption paperwork, school plays and business meetings, the ordinary magic of pancakes and bedtime stories, and 1,000 small moments that make a life worth living. But tonight, they were simply a family imperfect and healing and whole in all the ways that mattered. 1 year later, Brandon stood at the altar they'd built in their backyard garden, watching Victoria walk down the aisle between rows of folding chairs borrowed from the community center. She wore a simple cream dress and carried wildflowers Emma had picked that morning, her usual severe composure replaced by something radiant and unguarded. Emma preceded her as flower girl, scattering rose petals with the theatrical flourish of someone who'd been practicing for months. Her dress was the pale yellow she'd insisted on, like sunshine, she'd explained, because weddings should be bright. But Brandon's eyes kept returning to Victoria, this woman who'd learned to love by watching a 4-year-old teach her that families could be built from hope and breakfast conversations and the radical act of showing up. "She looks like a princess," Emma had whispered that morning, peeking through the bedroom door as Victoria got ready. "The best kind," Brandon had agreed. "The kind who saves herself and then helps other people do the same." Now, as Victoria reached the altar, her eyes bright with unshed tears, Brandon felt the weight of how far they'd all traveled. From that first morning in her office, broken coffee cups and crayon drawings, and the tentative beginnings of something none of them had known they needed. The ceremony was small. Mrs. Rodriguez, from their old apartment building, crying into tissues. Victoria's assistant, Janet, looking stunned to see her formerly workaholic boss, glowing with happiness. A handful of colleagues and neighbors, Emma's preschool teacher, and the owner of Mel's Diner, who'd insisted on catering the reception. But the empty chair in the front row held flowers for Sarah, and Emma had been very clear in her instructions to the minister. "Make sure you tell Mommy Sarah we're not forgetting her, we're just making more room for love." "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Emma interrupted with the confidence of someone who'd helped plan every detail. "Tell them about the family part first," she stage whispered. "The important part," Victoria laughed, reaching down to straighten Emma's flower crown. "Let him do it in order, sweetheart." But the minister, charmed by Emma's enthusiasm, improvised. "We're here today not just to celebrate the union of Brandon and Victoria, but to witness the official formation of a family that's already been growing in love and grace." Emma beamed, satisfied that the priorities had been properly established. Brandon had written his own vows, but standing there with Victoria's hands in his, looking at Emma's expectant face, the words he'd planned seemed inadequate. "A year ago," he said finally, "you taught me that love doesn't divide, it multiplies, that there's always room for one more person in the family drawing. You took my grief and showed me it could coexist with joy. You took my daughter and loved her like she'd been yours from the beginning." Victoria's tears started then, and Emma immediately produced a tissue from her flower basket with the preparedness of someone who'd anticipated this moment. "You saved us," Brandon continued, "but more than that, you let us save you back. And that's what family is, not perfect people, pretending to have it all figured out, but broken people, choosing to heal together." Victoria wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself enough to speak. When she finally found her voice, it was steady despite her tears. "I spent 40 years building walls," she said. "I was so afraid of losing something precious that I never let myself have anything precious to lose. Then Emma asked if I needed a hug, and those walls just crumbled." She looked down at Emma, who was listening with the solemnity of someone who understood she was witnessing history. "You taught me that love isn't about perfection, it's about presence. It's about showing up for pancakes and bedtime stories and scraped knees and school plays. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself." She turned back to Brandon. "I promise to show up. For both of you. For all the ordinary moments that make a life extraordinary. For the hard conversations and the silly ones. For the celebrations and the heartbreaks. I promise to be your family in every sense of the word." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and as they kissed, Emma cheered and threw the remaining petals in the air, creating a small shower of pink and white that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Now we're officially official," Emma announced to the assembled guests. "And I have 2 mommies and a daddy, and we're the luckiest family in the whole world." The reception spilled across their backyard and into the house, filled with the comfortable chaos of people who'd watched love grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Victoria moved through the crowd with Emma attached to her hip, both of them glowing with happiness that was impossible to fake. Brandon found them later by the dessert table, where Emma was explaining the significance of each layer of their 3-tiered cake to anyone who would listen. "The bottom is chocolate because that's Daddy's favorite," she was telling Mrs. Rodriguez. "The middle is vanilla because that's my favorite. And the top is strawberry because that's Victoria's favorite. See? It's a family cake." "That's very thoughtful, mija," Mrs. Rodriguez said, dabbing at her eyes. "Your mommies taught you well." Emma considered this with her usual gravity. "Actually, I think I taught them. Sometimes kids have to show grown-ups how to be happy." Victoria caught Brandon's eye across the table, her smile soft with the kind of contentment that couldn't be bought or achieved, only received as a gift. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, the three of them sat on the back porch steps, Emma between her parents, all of them still in their wedding clothes but barefoot now, comfortable in the easy intimacy of family. "Best day ever," Emma declared, leaning against Victoria's shoulder. "Except maybe tomorrow will be even better." "Why tomorrow?" Victoria asked, stroking Emma's hair. "Because tomorrow we wake up as a real family and get to start having adventures together forever and ever." Brandon reached across Emma to take Victoria's hand, their wedding rings catching the last light of the setting sun. "Forever and ever sounds about right." Victoria squeezed his fingers, then Emma's shoulder. "I love you both so much, it feels like my heart might explode from happiness." "That's impossible," Emma said scientifically. "Hearts are very strong. They stretch to hold all the love you put in them. Miss Peterson taught us that." "Miss Peterson is very wise," Victoria agreed. "Not as wise as you," Emma said loyally. "You figured out how to be part of our family, and that's the hardest job in the world." Victoria's eyes filled again, but these were tears of pure joy. "Actually, sweetheart, I think it might be the easiest job in the world. Once you know how to love people, everything else is just details." 3 months later, Brandon stood in the courthouse holding Victoria's hand while a judge made Emma's adoption official. Emma wore her best dress and had prepared a speech for the occasion, which she delivered with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. "Your Honor," she began, reading from notes written in her careful 5-year-old handwriting, "I would like Victoria Sterling Patterson to be my official mommy, because she makes the best pancakes and she never forgets to cut the crusts off my sandwiches, and she reads bedtime stories in different voices, and she loves me, even when I'm grumpy." The judge smiled, clearly charmed. "Those sound like excellent qualifications for a mother. Also," Emma continued, "she taught me that families aren't just about having the same blood, they're about having the same heart. And we all have the same heart now." When the judge pronounced the adoption complete, Emma launched herself into Victoria's arms with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. Victoria held her tight, burying her face in Emma's hair to hide her tears. "Now you're stuck with us forever," Emma whispered. "Best deal I ever made," Victoria whispered back. That evening they celebrated with dinner at Mel's Diner, the same booth where they'd first learned to be a family over pancakes and broken crayons. The owner brought out a cake with "Welcome to the Family, Victoria," written in purple frosting, and Emma insisted they take a picture to add to their growing collection of family moments. "This one goes on the refrigerator," Emma declared, examining the Polaroid with satisfaction. "Right next to my rocket ship drawing and the one of us at the beach and the picture from when Victoria learned to ride a bike." Brandon laughed, remembering that particular adventure. Victoria had confessed, sheepishly, that she'd never learned to ride a bicycle as a child. Her parents had been too focused on academic achievement for such frivolous pursuits. Emma had been horrified and immediately appointed herself as Victoria's cycling instructor, a role she'd approached with the patience of a saint and the determination of a drill sergeant. "You're going to need a bigger refrigerator," Victoria said, settling Emma on her lap while they waited for their dessert. "That's okay," Emma said pragmatically. "When families grow, everything else grows too. Houses, hearts, refrigerators, everything." As they drove home that night, Emma chattering in the back seat about all the things she wanted to show Victoria now that she was official, Brandon reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed 3 separate people into something whole and beautiful. Victoria had learned to braid hair and sing lullabies. Emma had learned that love multiplied rather than divided. And Brandon had learned that second chances weren't myths, they were miracles wrapped in ordinary moments, disguised as breakfast conversations and bedtime stories, and the radical act of choosing to trust again. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked softly, noticing his contemplative mood. "Just this. Us. How we went from strangers to family in less than 2 years. Sometimes the best things happen fast," Victoria said. "When you know, you know." "Did you know, that first morning in your office?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. "I knew Emma was special immediately. The way she saw through all my defenses to whatever was worth saving underneath. But you, I think I knew with you when you offered to take me to breakfast. Not because you wanted something from me, but because you saw I was lonely and thought pancakes might help. Did they help?" Victoria's smile was radiant in the dashboard lights. "They saved my life." 5 years later, Brandon stood in the wings of Emma's elementary school auditorium, watching his 10-year-old daughter command the stage as the lead in their production of Annie. She'd lobbied hard for the role, arguing that she understood what it meant to find a family when you least expected it. Victoria stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as Emma belted out, "Tomorrow," with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted that the sun would come out. "She's incredible," Victoria whispered. "She gets that from both her mothers," Brandon replied, squeezing Victoria's hand. After the performance, Emma ran to them still wearing her Annie costume, glowing with the adrenaline of a successful show. "Did you see me? Did I do good? Did you hear how loud everyone clapped? You were perfect," Victoria said, kneeling to Emma's level. "Absolutely perfect." "I dedicated my performance to all my parents," Emma announced. "Daddy, and you, and Mommy Sarah. Because all of you helped make me brave enough to sing in front of everyone." Victoria's breath caught, and Brandon saw the wonder in her eyes after all these years. She still marveled at Emma's ability to include Sarah in their family story without diminishing anyone else's place. "I think she would have been proud," Victoria said softly. "I know she would have been," Emma said with certainty. "She's always proud when we're brave and kind and when we love each other." As they drove home that night, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the excitement of her theatrical debut. Brandon glanced at Victoria, noting the soft satisfaction in her expression. "What?" she asked, catching him looking. "Just thinking about that first morning, when you were this powerful, untouchable CEO, and Emma was just a random 4-year-old who wandered into your office." "Best day of my life," Victoria said simply. "Even though your coffee cup broke?" "Especially because my coffee cup broke. Sometimes things have to shatter before they can be remade into something better." Brandon pulled into their driveway. Looking up at the house, they'd turned into a home. Windows warm with light. Emma's bicycle propped against the front porch. Victoria's garden flourishing in the spring sunshine. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was the life they'd built together from loss and hope and the radical belief that families could be chosen as well as born. As they carried sleeping Emma inside, Brandon caught sight of the refrigerator, still covered with her artwork, but also featuring school photos, family vacation snapshots, and Victoria's first attempt at a crayon drawing a stick figure family holding hands under a sun that looked suspiciously like a fried egg. "Remember when you said you didn't know how to be part of a family?" Brandon asked Victoria as they tucked Emma into bed. "Vaguely," Victoria replied, smoothing Emma's hair. "That person feels like someone I used to know, a long time ago. She was pretty lonely." "She was. But she was also pretty brave. It takes courage to let people love you when you've forgotten how to love yourself." Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something that sounded like family meeting in the morning, making them both smile. They stood in the doorway for a moment, watching their daughter sleep, surrounded by the evidence of a life fully lived, school awards, friendship bracelets, books read until their spines broke, stuffed animals arranged with the precision of someone who understood that love required attention to detail. "She's going to change the world," Victoria said quietly. "She already has," Brandon replied. "She changed ours." Later, lying in bed with Victoria's head on his chest, Brandon thought about the mathematics of love, how it defied every logical principle he'd ever learned. Addition that resulted in multiplication, division that somehow made everyone whole, subtraction that actually added richness and depth. "Brandon? Thank you. For what this time? For trusting me with your family, for letting me become part of something so precious, for showing me that love isn't about deserving, it's about receiving grace and then passing it on." Brandon kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the lingering sweetness of Emma's bedtime routine that somehow always clung to both of them. "Thank you for seeing us," he said, "for looking at a struggling single dad and his little girl and thinking we might be worth loving." "Oh, my darling," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were never worth loving. You were essential to love. There's a difference." Outside their bedroom window, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, full of stories and second chances and the quiet miracles that happened when people chose to see past their fear to the love waiting on the other side. Tomorrow would bring new adventures: Emma's soccer practice, Victoria's board meeting, Brandon's facilities review, the ordinary magic of a family navigating life together. But tonight, they were simply three people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and learned that sometimes the best families aren't born, they're built, one breakfast conversation at a time, one crayon drawing at a time, one moment of choosing love over fear at a time. In her room down the hall, Emma dreamed of spotlights and applause, but also of pancakes and family meetings and the beautiful certainty that she was loved beyond measure by three parents who'd figured out how to heal each other's hearts. And in the quiet space between sleeping and waking, Sarah Patterson smiled from whatever place mothers go when their work on earth is done, knowing that love had multiplied exactly as it was meant to, not replacing what was lost, but creating something new and beautiful from the ashes of what had been. The Sterling Patterson family slept peacefully in their house, full of laughter and dreams, proof that sometimes the most extraordinary families begin with the simplest question: "Do you need a hug?" The answer, it turned out, was always yes.